My guest today on Bridges was raped when she was just 13 years old by a family member. That rape resulted in a pregnancy, and today she is here on Bridges to share how she found His grace. I'm Monica Schmelter, and I'm glad that you could join us on Bridges today. My guest today is Serena Dyksen, and she's going to share her story with us. And as we get started, I want to let you know that this is a mature conversation. It's an adult conversation. So if you have little children, maybe you can get them busy doing something else or over into another room. And the story today, while it's mature and while it's raw and all the things that are sometimes hard to talk about, it's important that we talk about them in light of God's grace and in light of His ability to redeem and to rescue. Serena, I want to welcome you today.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
I appreciate you coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked through your book, She Found His Grace, and I commend you for your bravery to share, and I believe that it will really help people. And before we talk about the ministry that you and that your husband have now, I'd like it if we could just start with your story, because it really, when you look at a start in life, it was a tragic start and very hard. Tell me kind of what the situation was when you were 13.
Yeah, so I grew up in a pretty broken home. My parents, they did not have a relationship with Jesus. And when I was 13 years old, I was sexually assaulted by an uncle, which resulted in an unplanned pregnancy. My mom had her own trauma, and so when she heard the news that I had been sexually assaulted, it just spiraled her out of control. Devastated her as a parent, and she was looking for help. And the help that our family doctor gave her was to take me for an abortion. And I had never heard that word before, so I just didn't even know what that was.
Well, I can't imagine for you at just 13, first of all, such a violation to be sexually assaulted by anybody,
Right.
But a trusted family member. So I'm so sorry, as I'm sure all the people watching are just so sorry that you had to endure that. When you say that your mom had her own trauma, do you mean like when she was growing up that she was assaulted in some way?
She was also assaulted, so she had that in her life as well. So this was just something that she was reliving when she heard that I had been sexually assaulted.
Yeah. I know, Serena, as I was going through your book, She Found His Grace, one of my thoughts was, for Christian parents, this would be really hard. Mm-hmm. Just to hear about such an atrocity, such an assault happening to your child, and that there's a pregnancy, like that would be a hard, hard trial. For people that don't know the Lord, like they don't have a Christian counselor or a pastor or a group of safe people that they can talk to. They were on their own trying to figure this out. Yeah. And you said at 13 you had never heard the word abortion?
I had never heard that word before. I had no idea. I think because of my mom's trauma, like we didn't get into the nitty gritty. That was just something we didn't talk about. And so I was so uneducated. I think in their attempt to guard us, it really, it just left us very uneducated.
And I know that your heart toward your parents is just compassion and understanding because they didn't know. And many people watching today, right? Our hearts are to protect our children. We don't want them to hear adult words. We don't want them to hear adult conversation when they're little because you can't handle that. But you're saying like it really left you in a situation, nobody talked about this. So I'm thinking when your uncle was assaulting you, you didn't know to tell your parents.
Honestly, I think you're in such shock and you're like, that something's not right. That was not right. And a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and you just want to forget what happened. So for me, I didn't even know who to tell. I think talking about sexual abuse in our family was just this hush hush because of the trauma in our family. So for me, I didn't know, it wasn't something that I felt like I could go tell my parents. And I actually ended up telling an older classmate on the school bus of what happened, kind of like to say, I need help, but I don't know what help I need. And so, yeah, I'm so thankful that she reported it, even though it was probably the hardest conversation that I ever had. Um, in fact, I denied it. I was like, no, nothing happened. But then eventually I was like, yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can be hard, Serena, for people to understand that. But I
Mm-hmm.
understand what you're saying. It's so awful. You just want it to be done and over with. You certainly don't want to admit it. And then
Right.
sometimes when people do say this is what happened, they get blamed,
Mm-hmm.
they get shamed. There are just so many things, and so much had already gone wrong.
Right.
So you've never heard the word abortion.
Right.
You didn't really know how to share with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so your family doctor, the only help that's prescribed is an abortion.
Right.
So tell us about that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so we went to the doctor's office and he confirmed an unplanned pregnancy. And I just remember him looking at my mom and saying, you should take her for an abortion. And my mom just nodding her head, yes, that's what they would do. And for me, just not knowing anything other than our family's in crisis, I don't even think I even fully understood pregnancy. Like that was, everything was just so, I was so naive and didn't understand any of it. So of course, I just wanted our family, help for our family. That's what I wanted. I needed help. We all needed help. And so yeah, and I just so remember um, them teeing it up for my family to not even get help from people outside the clinic, just saying that people outside hate you. And my mom,
Like the people that are standing on the sidewalk or the street or whatever it
Right.
was. So the abortion clinic
mm-hmm.
kind of set you up to believe that all the outsider people were not your friends. They
Right.
hated you.
Right, right. And so I just remember my mom saying, they don't understand what we're going through and how dare they judge us. And so it already set the tone of to not talk to the people outside. And so for me, I just remind people, when you go outside an abortion clinic, conduct yourself in a way that you're a safe person, because I always think of my mom. Like, would things have looked different if there would have been a safe person out there? And unfortunately, there was no one out there. So I always encourage people to go. I go out to the clinic myself, but I want to be compassionate and loving.
I think that those are some very good words of advice from someone that's been there.
Mm-hmm.
For people to think about, for someone to even go to think about getting an abortion or all of that, probably the person is in some sort of crisis.
Absolutely.
And to be mean and to shame them. And I am a pro-life person. I believe in life. There's just a way to handle ourselves and conduct ourselves as Christians so that something bad has already happened, something even more bad is about to happen, the abortion. And it's like, what good can be brought? What can happen? So when the abortion was completed, did you understand more fully what had happened? Did you ever talk about it?
Absolutely not. I had no idea. I thought I was at a doctor's office and they just said it was a clump of cells. So that's all I knew. And I was just so uneducated. Like so many women that I talked to, they're just so uneducated. And so once the abortion was over, all I knew that I had gone through yet another traumatic experience. I always say that the abortion was worse than the rape. Mm-hmm. And, what this lie that was sold to us was it was supposed to help us. Yeah. And yet here I was re-traumatized all over again.
So in your personal experience, you would describe the abortion as more traumatic than the rape.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty powerful, and I don't think many people ever give that any thought or consideration. I think the thought is, well, you've been violated. Let's mitigate the damage.
Right.
And you're saying that abortion is a lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I know you talk about all of this in your book, She Found His Grace. So you don't talk about it, you just stuff it, right? Pretend like everything's okay, and that's, imagine what your parents are doing too. And then you find yourself pregnant again.
Yes. So we just had Planned Parenthood come into our schools, which we need to know who's coming in to our schools. And so I thought I could trust them. So I went to Planned Parenthood and they said, you're pregnant, but you should abort this baby because you're young, you're poor, and in school. And I knew, I at 13, I didn't know what abortion was, but at 16, I knew what abortion was, and I would never purposely end the life of another person. And so I knew that was something that I would not ever do again. And I just remember my boyfriend saying, what do you think about abortion? And he grew up in the church, but they never talked about it. And I shared my story with him for the first time. And he just looked at me and he said, I don't know how we'll figure it out, but we'll figure it out. And we chose life that day.
So I'm thinking about what you just said. So the first pregnancy in abortion was an assault by a family member. The second situation, 16, it's a boyfriend situation. And even though no one had talked to you really about abortion, between those ages, you had figured out that it was wrong and that you would never do it again.
Right.
Without the benefit of anybody explaining anything to you, you know that.
Right.
And so you chose life at 16. And your boyfriend says he'll figure it out.
Yes.
Or you'll figure it out
We'll
together.
figure it out, yeah.
So how did you figure it out?
Oh my goodness. So we, of course we told our parents, and that was really hard because, that was, we were in high school. So that was pretty shocking to them, right? But, they came around, and we had the support of them. We had the support of our church, which was awesome. They didn't let us sit in our sin, but they were helpful in teaching us the skills that we needed, how to budget for housing, how to get a car. They just came alongside of us and just loved us really well. Even our youth group threw a baby shower for us. So, it was just so beautiful of how they loved us well during that time.
And it's so beautiful that you all chose life and that everybody around you celebrated life and helped you do all the things that 16-year-old people just can't possibly know because you're just 16. We've got to take a break. We want you to stay with us here today on Bridges. When we come back, we'll learn more about Serena's story and how she found his grace.
Don't miss another episode of Bridges. Subscribe to our YouTube channel today, where you can find all of Monica's latest teachings and interviews. It's easy to do. Just visit youtube.com, search Monica Schmelter, and click subscribe. Once you are subscribed, click the bell icon to get notified when a new episode is available to view. Thanks for watching Bridges.
Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org.
Today on Bridges, my guest is Serena Dyksen, and she is telling her story true story of love, hope, forgiveness after abortion. And out of her experience, she's written a book and founded a ministry, and the book is She Found His Grace. And Serena, really, you started out in some really tragic circumstances, at 13, being assaulted by a family member, an uncle, and that assault resulting in a pregnancy, an abortion, and then a teen pregnancy with your boyfriend. And yet, that time, people surrounded you with love. Your boyfriend's family, who's now your husband,
My husband
got you into church, and the church, you said, didn't let you sit in your sin.
Right.
but celebrated life and helped you really grow up.
Right. Absolutely, they did. Yes, they helped us, which I'm so grateful for. If we wouldn't have had their support, we wouldn't have finished school. Our life would have looked different. And but they just loved us so well, and we're so thankful for them. Also, during that time, though, they didn't know my brokenness. They didn't know what I brought into the church. So we sat in the pews with a mask on quite a bit and hid behind a lot of brokenness. And I think looking back, if we would have shared that sooner, they would have loved us well through that, but we didn't know that at the time.
And when you say you sat with a mask, do you mean that they didn't realize that you had had an abortion at just 13?
Right. They had no idea.
So even though, right, even though your boyfriend came from a Christian family and they welcomed you into church and helped you, you know, you got married and you're choosing life, there were still parts of your story that you hadn't shared. Abortion was a secret.
Yeah.
Is abortion a secret for a lot of women and teens?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So 1 in 4 women in the church, and also a high percentage of women and men have sexual abuse in their past, and they never tell anybody. And so when I go into churches now, you know, there's men and women that just come up and say, I have that secret too. Yeah.
And secrets, they can cause tremendous amount of damage. Really what you found as you're growing into adulthood is that secret was really going to kind of haunt you in many different ways.
Right.
Is that part of the reason that you wrote the book, She Found His Grace?
Yes. So through the process of finding healing, which I ended up in some pretty dark places. I had physical problems, even to the point of I almost lost my life, to we were not able to have more children, to the point of really being at a place that I felt like I didn't deserve to be a wife or a mother. And that
is that partly because of the abortion?
Yes. Yeah, which is a very common with women, and they don't even recognize that as one of the things. So a lot of women, they after abortion, they end up having babies right away. They want to have babies too as like a replacement baby, but you don't really replace that baby. Also, there's lots of physical issues. Some women will never be able to have children again. So as I look back, God's grace and even allowing me to have my children at a young age was just his hand on our lives, right? It didn't make sense at the time, and it didn't look like how it was supposed to. But we've talked many times, if I would have waited until my 30s, we would not have had children. And so we're so thankful for our story in that. But for us, when I was walking through my trauma and really my brokenness of feeling like I didn't deserve to be a mother or wife, I moved out, and I fell into drinking every single day. I was abusing prescription pain pills because of the doctors were giving me that because I had physical problems, right? And God just meeting me in my brokenness of one night just crying out in my car and just saying, God, I have no one but you. And God seeing me and, totally intoxicated in my mess, and him saying, you know what, I'm going to meet you in that brokenness. I was waiting for you to stop running from me, and I'm going to lavish you in a love that I wanted to give you all along, but you were running from me.
Yeah. I want to talk about for just a moment, Serena, you talk about when you said to God, you're the only one I have. So you left your marital home, right? Feeling unworthy as a woman, as a wife, as a mom, and covering all of that up with drinking and prescription drugs because of that abortion that had been kept a secret, and the pain of that secret had grown and grown. So now you've given yourself over to being intoxicated and all of those things. And as I understand it, you called a lot of people to come pick you up, and everybody said no.
Right. I called people to come get me that night, and no one would come and get me. It was,
Were they
I,
mad at you? Is that what it was? Or-
I think they just got tired. I burned bridges. At first it was so out of character for me to call at 3 a.m. Like, they're like, "What are you doing?" But at that point, they didn't call me out on it. And then as I continued to walk in my mess, they were like, "Okay, this is out of control." And to be honest, if someone would have showed up that night, I wouldn't have gotten to my brokenness. I wouldn't have been at the end of myself. So,
Yeah, that's why I ask you that question. That sometimes, and I mean, people, we all have to be led by the Holy Spirit.
mhm.
But sometimes when we rescue people, that enablement keeps them
Yep.
from reaching out to Christ. You had to come to that place where your pain
Mhm.
and all of that was much greater than what other people thought, and much greater than you keeping that secret hidden. Because as you prayed and cried out, then God really started to restore.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, I really needed to get to the end of myself, and I think sometimes we do rescue people, and then we never get to that full surrender, right? And so I needed to be at that place of fully surrendered to Him, so that He could come in and start putting a healing balm on my heart. Because I was trying to do all these things on my own, and I could never do what He wanted to do.
Right. Because none of us, we're not able to heal ourselves.
No.
We're not the great physician.
Right.
As much as we even believe the Bible and pray, we're just not equipped to heal ourselves. And especially when we're talking about the amount of trauma and tragedy
Yep.
that had happened throughout your life. And you needed to be at that place where you had nobody and nothing else but God. And yet, when you came to that place, your husband took you back.
Yes.
And then did everything get better in 1 second, or did it take a bit?
Oh my goodness. So it is like peeling an onion back. My husband and I went to marriage counseling, and, even at going to marriage counseling, I still didn't disclose everything to my counselor, because he went to my church, and I thought, if he knew everything about me, he would go back and tell people, and what would they think of me, right? And so what I love is we're good friends with him, and he would have never,
Of course
ever, but that's how the enemy works, right? And so, so it took counseling, it took retreats, it took us putting a lot of work into saying, I want everything that Jesus has for me to set me free. And that means getting in the Word every single day and allowing Him to transform our minds and our hearts, and continuing to surrender to Him.
Yeah. And I say that because I think sometimes the way that we tell our stories, people think that healing and restoration and redemption is immediate. Now, salvation is immediate when we cry out, but there is a process. And much of Serena's journey is outlined in this book. She found His grace, and she actually has a ministry now where she reaches out and helps women that are in similar circumstances. So it took you, Serena, a process
Yes.
of being willing just really to totally surrender. And now you're at a place through this book and also through your ministry that you're able to really come alongside women and help them. What does that look like for you today?
So what our ministry does is we offer abortion recovery, and it is a biblical study where the ladies walk through the process of mourning the loss of their children, walking through that forgiveness. We want them to walk through that repenting, and also the forgiveness that God gives, and freedom, because that He gives us freedom. And then after that process, then we walk them through a pain to purpose, because we want them to use their pain for what God's calling them to do. And we know that if they can find their healed voice, they can speak into others so that they'll choose life. And that's the heart of our ministry.
And that's really what redemption is all about. It's coming full circle. There are things that we all go through, and God doesn't eradicate like all of that. He forgives all of that, but sometimes there are consequences. For example, you mentioned that you weren't able to have more children.
Right.
Also, you talk about in the book, She Found His Grace, that you really weren't aware of how abortion can continue to affect your life years later.
Right.
Was that true for you?
Absolutely. We had no idea how it would affect us emotionally, spiritually, physically. They don't tell you all of that. It's just this is going to fix that right now, right? That's the lie they tell us. And with the women we talk to, and even myself, I mean, it's wrecking marriages. It's affecting how women parent. I mean, how many women feel like they don't deserve their children, so they're not able to parent their children? How many women are walking through addiction because of abortion? So, I mean, there's so many layers to this. And so we have to get to the root of, if we can meet women who are facing an unplanned pregnancy with, okay, so what's driving you to abort and meet that need? That saves the whole family,
There's so much deeper message other than abortion is sin. And abortion is sin.
It is.
And abortion is murder.
Yep.
But it's not like God just wrote that down without reason, right?
Right.
Or without help and mercy and love toward all of us. And I think that that's what you're saying, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, it's a much bigger picture of how it's going to wreck our lives. And I think, it's a secret. The enemy likes to keep that secret. He sells this, it's going to fix this problem. But, then you're living with that.
That's
and
right.
It's just causing all sorts of issues in life, and it affects everything. And I don't know how many people I've talked to that even say our marriages didn't survive this.
Yeah, and that's the untold part of this story. But I thank you so much for coming today and for sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for watching Bridges.
When I truly turned my heart to the Lord, He took every sin I ever did away from me.
God really is your other half. God, He's the only person who can really, fill those holes and cracks in your heart that you're so wanting someone to fill.
It's no good to have a big dream if you're not putting yourself in motion to go after that.
Don't give in. God's word says you're an overcomer. It takes training. It takes discipline. And so when you're fighting that good fight of the faith, you take your story, whatever it is, and you saturate it in faith, and you fight for it.
Visit monicaschmelter.com to schedule Monica to speak at your next event.